How many of you are new to this session? You weren't with us in the first one. Okay, cool. So I'm going to do just a very, very quick recap. Essentially, this is a 5-step process in getting you to your dream job, your dream career, and really understanding your passion and what makes you tick. So for those of you just joining us, we're going to pick up on step 3. And this is an interesting place to pick up because step 3 is really when you become externally facing. That's when we're talking about resumes and interviews and networking and things like that. So there's a lot of practical nuggets in there. Step 1 and 2, and the reason we spend so much time on step 1 and 2 is because to me they're the most important steps. It's really setting up your job search. It's really identifying your passion, your interests, those things that are most important to you, and then creating a plan from it. So there's a whole element of before you jump into the job search, before you start creating a resume, before you start applying, really understanding where you're going first, because as I mentioned before, a lot of times a lot of employers aren't hiring you on where you're coming, based on where you're coming from, but really on where you're going. So your ability to tell that story, which is where we're going to pick up, becomes absolutely critical and crucial in your ability to get a job. And you're much more likely to get hired if you're underqualified but have the right story than if you're overqualified and have the wrong story. So don't let just your qualifications guide the message and what you're going to say. So those are just super short recap, and we're going to pick up with telling a story. So telling a story breaks up into multiple different parts, and it's going to be telling your story. No, there's not 2 stories in this room that are going to be identical and they're going to be seeking the same end goal. So think about what you want to tell, what you want to leave people with. And someone in the previous session asked, when do you start networking? When's the right time to start meeting people? In my opinion, it's after you're done with step 3, and that's once you have your story to tell, that's when you can start telling it. I see a lot of people doing informational interviews or networking or meeting folks before they have their story, before they have their quote-unquote elevator pitch. And it's nice, you get to meet a lot of people, but unfortunately that doesn't lead to jobs very often because people don't know what to do with you. So once you have a story to tell with some action items to give someone that you meet, it then becomes a lot more effective to start networking. So in terms of telling a story, you're really asking some simple questions. Who am I and where am I going? Those are the 2 most important things that someone wants to walk away with after they meet you. Who are you? Where are you going? Why is that important? 1, it tells us that you have a good understanding of who you are, that you have a good grasp on your skills, your qualifications, what you're looking to grow into. And where am I going gives us a good sense of the path that you want to follow, right? So being at Viacom, Viacom's a big company. We have a lot of really popular brands, and we're what is considered a full life cycle company, meaning that if you look at our brands, starting with Nickelodeon, we get you really with like Nick Kids or Nick Jr. when you're like 2 years old, right? And you stay with Nickelodeon all the way until you graduate to like MTV and VH1 and Comedy Central, and then you end up in TV land somewhere, and meanwhile you're watching Paramount Pictures, right? So we've got kind of the whole like cycle in there. And so because we're a lifestyle brand, like a lot of other brands, like Coca-Cola would be one of those where there's no age for Coke. Like you drink Coca-Cola like whether you're a kid or an adult. Just coming to a company and saying, it's been my dream to work for your company, won't get you too far because we reach so many people that it could be a lot of people's dreams. And so you want to have a story that's different than, let's say you're interviewing for a position with me and you say, well, it's been my dream to work at Viacom because I used to watch Nick when I was a kid. Well, great, but so did everybody else in this building. So how is your story different than some random tourist that I'm going to grab from Times Square and say, why do you want to work at Viacom? If you 2 have the same answer, odds are you're not distinguishing yourself in the way you're telling your story. So really be clear about who you are and where you're going, and keep it simple. Keep it really simple. People have short attention spans, right? So understand the difference between, know your audience, know who you're talking to. If you're talking to your college counselor at school, if you're talking to your advisor in life or whatever, those are opportunities where you can be broader and really kind of talk it out and talk it through and understand where you're going. But once you're talking to someone who may be in a position to one day give you a job or facilitate your job process, you have to keep it simple, concise, and to the point. Because if you're too broad, there's a lot of people that are going to walk away and say, well, she or he was really nice, but I have no clue what to do with them. And so that's not going to translate into a job. What you want is, you don't care if they think you're nice, but they want to walk away thinking, I know what they're about, I know exactly where to send them, and I know where they can be useful. So think about it that way and how you want to tell your story. So your story really breaks into multiple parts, and it's developing your pitch. It's that notion of being able to tell someone that you just met in a few sentences or in a few seconds where you're going. So people call it the elevator pitch, which is fine. It's the whole notion that if you're stuck in an elevator with someone for just a quick ride, can they get a sense of what you're all about in that short period of time? And they might. To me, I don't really care about the length of it as long as it's sensible and it kind of gets there, because everybody's going to have completely different stories. So, some might take you 30 seconds to get through, some might take you 2 minutes, but as long as your audience is captive during that 2 minutes, you're okay. So, think of your story, and the first part of your story that people are going to see, for the majority of the time, it's going to be your resume. That's your first line of defense in a way. And that's the first impression that people are going to have of you if you don't know them, right? If you're at a networking event and they meet you in person, then the resume is the second part. But if you're applying to jobs or if you're seeking opportunities and you're really a job seeker, that's the first thing that they're going to see, right? So understand the nuance between being a job seeker and being an early career person or a career changer, because no one wants to hire a job seeker, but someone wants to hire someone who's passionate about growing a career in something. So for those of you who want marketing, you're a marketer. Your story is that you're a marketer. You're not a college student seeking to potentially be a marketer. You're not a job seeker. You're a marketer. What are you? You're a marketer, and be specific about which part of marketing you fall into. So we just had a conversation with someone during the break that, if you take something like marketing or even communication, some of those really, really broad topics, simply stating in your story that you want to be in marketing just won't be enough. Because the reality is if a lot of big companies are going to have brand marketing, consumer marketing, ad sales marketing, retail marketing, integrated marketing, event marketing, those are completely different functions within marketing, and sometimes they don't even sit in the same building. So when you are interviewing, you are sort of expected to be able to articulate which part of this you are more drawn to, or at least articulate your understanding of the differences between the two. Because if you're interviewing with someone and they say to you, what do you want to do? And you say, well, I like brand marketing and I like event planning, and I also like producing things, and they're different skill sets, right? And so you become sort of a dangerous gamble for them because they don't know if they're going to hire you, and within 6 to 12 months you're going to realize that you don't like it and want to move somewhere else. It's sort of a bad investment for us and for you, because the first 3 to 6 months you're anywhere, it's really training. You're learning. So you want to be able to tell that story that way. And remember what a resume's purpose is, right? The main purpose of a resume is not to be your autobiography. The main purpose of a resume is to determine your suitability as it relates to a specific job. So if you think about it this way, you're applying to a position. Your resume should match the position that you're applying for, because ultimately the person reading your resume and the person who's going to be hiring you, they don't really necessarily care about your life story, right? It's a nice to have the life story, and that tells us a little bit about the potential cultural fit or maybe the values and the things that you're interested in. But what they really want to see is, have you done the things that we absolutely need for you to do? So when you look at these job descriptions, in your mind, start kind of reading them with the understanding that they're virtually always split up in different sections. One is going to be a description of the position or the company that includes some of the responsibilities of the role. 2 will be basic qualifications or required qualifications. Those are things, especially with big companies, that by law you have to meet in order for us to even consider you. So any company that you're applying to that's a big company, and that could be a government employer or anything, we are bound to actually only look at the people who meet those basic criteria. The third section is going to be desired qualifications. So desired is sort of your nice to haves, right? They're something that you might use in the position, but they're not the bread and butter of the role. So basic required qualifications are the things that you absolutely need, and desired are the things that are nice to have. So that's the purpose of the resume. That's how your resume should read and should be kind of set up. We get a lot of questions about resumes. That tends to be kind of one of the areas that people struggle with the most. And part of the reason is I think people try to reinvent the wheel when they write a resume. They sit with a blank canvas and they start typing like everything they've ever done. Don't start there. Start with jobs. And this is what sort of section 1 and 2 covered. And start with the jobs that you're specifically seeking. Breaking them into the sections, the qualifications and the requirements, and then start populating your resume with those requirements and qualifications. And most of you, I'm ready to bet, have sat in front of a job description and said, wow, I really do qualify for this, but no one's called me. And the reason for that is you might qualify for it, you might know it, but how am I supposed to know it if you haven't translated your skills into something that I can understand? Right? So if you think that I have about 5 to 7 seconds to skim a resume real quick, in those 5 seconds, I need to understand that you're applying for the right role. So creating a perfect resume is really all about creating a relevant resume, and it doesn't have to be super pretty. It doesn't have to be, you know, colors everywhere. We're not looking at design here. We're looking at how relevant is it in terms of skills and qualifications. What are the things that you've done, and what are you applying to? Those things need to match, or at least have a sort of a logical reason why you could be there. Interest and direction. So your resume speaks that you're super passionate about entertainment, and that you're a singer, and that you're one day looking to move to LA, and you're applying for Goldman Sachs. It happens. Could you get a job at Goldman Sachs while being a singer? Absolutely. But is that going to be their first choice? Probably not. So you need to play the game a little bit and make sure that the direction that you're going and that your interest lines up with the company that you're applying for and the people that may eventually employ you. It should be easy to follow. If your 12-year-old cousin can't understand your resume or figure out what you're all about, odds are it's too complicated. It needs to be a really dumbed down version of what you've done, and it needs to also be a standalone document. This part of being a standalone document is something that people mess up all the time, because there's always kind of this notion of, well, I explained it during the interview. So I left it off my resume, but you know, once I'm in the interview, I'll explain it. You won't get to the interview. So that's a problem in and of itself, and a lot of people want to cover this in the cover letter, but in reality, especially for highly sought positions, we're not going to read cover letters unless your resume has captured my attention first. I mean, again, I mentioned in the first session, like, wash everything with common sense, right? So we get that question, really, you don't read cover letters? Well, if I have 300 applicants, I guarantee you there's not a single one of those cover letters that says, dear recruiter, I suck, I'm unreliable, I can't write, I'm awful, but you should hire me. Not one will say that. They all will say, I'm uniquely qualified for the position you're looking to seek, and I can't wait to contribute to the growth of your company, right? They all say the same thing. So the cover letter doesn't get me as much. The cover letter is going to get me if I'm hiring for an editorial position, because ultimately it's your first writing sample that I see. So focus on the resume more than anything else. If it doesn't stand alone, make sure it does. It does need to be grammatically sound. I'm not someone who, personally, I'm a super stickler for that stuff. But virtually everybody I work with is, and part of the reason is that it's really difficult to make a case that you pay attention to detail when you have misspellings in your resume, and that's something that we're going to look for. So double check, make sure somebody else reads it, that you get feedback from someone else. The formatting we also get questions on, because people say, well, I'm an art designer, or I'm a graphic designer who works on mobile, how do I set up my resume? It doesn't really matter. As long as your formatting is professional and is appropriate for the position that you're applying for, you're okay. There isn't one format that's going to work, but there are some formats that just don't work. We have some designers, for example, that every once in a while will do a resume that's so creative that you literally can't read it. That's a problem. Like, if I can't get your contact information from your resume because you got too cute with it, they're probably not going to get a call, right? So keep it kind of professional, keep it easy to follow. Those are going to be kind of your basic guidelines. There are some critical attributes that we sort of always look for. Any position that you're going to apply for, whether it's entry level, whether it's mid level, whether it's senior level, we kind of always are going to look for these positions. Now, how many people in this room are kind of like more junior, entry level-ish, kind of early career? All right, so I'll go through these and sort of like help you understand what I mean and why we look for them. In an entry-level role, virtually anything that you do, you're going to be in a support function where you may be working on your own projects, but you're also going to be supporting people who know more than you about that specific function. And when you do that, when you're in a support function, when you're assisting a team, when you're helping things go smoothly, your reliability, your flexibility, and your attention to detail is absolutely critical. Because if someone can't trust you to send an email on their behalf, if someone can't trust you to make sure the right place is booked, if someone can't trust you to make sure that something is sent when it's meant to be sent, you're not going to succeed. And ultimately, and we'll talk about it in step 5, but if you don't succeed in whatever you're doing, even if you like it or not, that's really going to count against you. So when we interview, when we look at resumes, when we look at applications, we are looking for these things. So reliability, just in terms of your ability to execute the things that you say you're going to execute. Flexibility is particularly important because you may come into one job description, but companies change all the time. There's a lot of things that are going to be outside of your control. If you work at an ad agency and a specific client pulls their account and you get a new account, you may play a different role tomorrow morning. There are going to be some things where you need to be flexible. We tend to struggle a lot with people that are very rigid in the workforce, because what that means is that we have to pigeonhole them into just one thing that they can do, and if that one function is no longer available, you sort of don't have a use for them anymore. So you want to have that flexibility and show that. Attention to detail again. Oddly enough, it's one of the things that's like super misspelled in resumes is attention to detail. Yeah.
So for the first point, let's say you have two people who are ideally qualified for a position.
Yep.
How much benefit would it be for someone to mention their closeness to the physical office as opposed to the other candidate being from Westchester, someplace much farther where there's commuter time and reliability could take a hit from that? Is this something ever worth mentioning when you are pitching in a cover letter or something like that?
So there's two answers to that. There's the HR answer, which is we're an equal opportunity employer, and we will consider everyone equal. And that it doesn't matter where you live or what your background is, you're gonna have the same shot at the job. So let me take that hat off for a second. Yeah, there's gonna be some positions where we're gonna look at that. There's positions that require crazy hours, and in those roles, it may factor in. Now, whether or not that gets you the job, I don't think it will. I have yet to see someone not get a job because of where they live if they're local, right? I've seen them not get a job if they're in Miami and looking to move to New York and they're not here yet. That I've seen happen, but it can happen for others. But in general, that's not really a big deal. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. But where it does sort of play a factor is when you're applying, because if you live in Philly, for example, but you're willing to move to New York the day you get a job, and if somebody sees a Philly address on your resume, depending on the jobs you're applying for, they may not call you because there may be 50 other applicants in New York. So for jobs that are somewhat generic and in high demand, physical location could play a little bit of a role, but not a huge deal. So executive presence is the next thing we look for, and executive presence really in a nutshell is the way you present yourself in a corporate environment. And I think a lot of people think of corporate in like banks and finance, and that being sort of a rigid corporate environment. You wear a suit and a tie and all that. That's not really true. Think of corporate as like whatever the corporate culture is of the company that you're going into, because that's the culture that we're looking for. So, like this is a corporate attire at Viacom. This would be like dressed down Hawaiian Friday at Goldman Sachs, right? So like completely different. But know what you're going into, because we want to get a sense that you know how to like be a role player within that organization, and that we don't have to tell you like, hey, we're meeting with the CEO tomorrow, don't wear sandals and chew gum. Like, those are things that, and it happens, right? But your executive presence is really your ability to be in a corporate environment and succeed, and that leads right into your communication style and skills. It's not about having an accent or not having an accent. Some people ask that question a lot. I speak with an accent, is that a problem? No, I don't care if you have an accent. My understanding the point of what you're trying to say. Because concise communications are really important in the workplace, right? If you're working on teams and people don't understand the gist of where you're getting at, or you're a poor communicator, not gonna work. So that applies to written communication and verbal communication, and that's gonna come out in the way you present. And common sense is sort of the thing we can't teach. Unfortunately, either you got it or you don't. It's really tough to test for, but there are some interviewers. There's a lot of like behavioral-based interviews that are going now, and there's someone that I know that, for example, would ask a question during the interviews: if I drop a bowling ball in the middle of the ocean, how long does it take that bowling ball to hit the ocean floor? I don't know. There's no answer to that. But someone's going to watch you go through that process, right? Like, how are you getting to that process? What kind of common sense logic are you applying to this question? Because there is no one answer, right? So you do have to sort of expect the unexpected sometimes, because those are questions that people will ask. So common sense is really important, because as much as I'd like to tell you, we were talking about sort of perception versus reality. The majority of seniors today believe that, I think it's over 50 or 60% of them believe that they are going to be trained in their first job, but in reality less than 20% are going to be trained in their first job. They're going to be thrown right into the fire and asked to execute. So common sense becomes really, really important. So basic sections of a resume, we're all familiar with them, but we're going to kind of go through them one by one. So let's talk about contact information. This is kind of it's a no-brainer, and for most of you it's kind of a gimme, but your contact information. You don't need an address on there. You can include one, but we're not going to mail you anything. We need an email address and we need a phone number. Those are the two things that we need. So don't get too cute with it without including one or the other and thinking like, oh, I'm going to force them to call me. No, we're just not going to call you. Just include both. If you still have your email address from 7th grade, like Superstar Rockstar 71, get rid of it. Get a professional one. Yeah.
Should we use NYU email address or another email address?
That's a good question. I'm sort of torn on that. I tend to prefer the non-NYU emails, and the reason is, and it's a simple preference, right? You ask that same question to 100 people, actually, everything that we're talking about today, you ask 100 people the same question, they're going to give you 100 different answers. The NYU emails are the school emails in general. It's not because it's NYU, it's any school. It's sort of, people will see it and assume that either you're still in school or you're just finishing, and so they're automatically sort of psychologically looking at you with that lens of, you're an entry-level person, and you might not be, right? So it's really sort of a psychological play with people. Now the flip side of that argument is NYU's a great school, so somebody sees NYU, they might be more likely to call you. So there's not the right answer. I mean, personally I like the professional emails more, but some of the people I work with don't mind at all. It's not like someone's not going to call you because you have it, right? But someone's not going to call you if you have like an inappropriate email address on there. So.
What do you mean with a professional?
Like something that sounds more professional, like first name, last name, or like first initial, last name, as opposed to, and then Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, whatever. It's really just the first part. Sometimes it's a little awkward. Your objective line. We get questions about the objective line and the objective section. I personally do not like the objective section because I find them ridiculously corny and cheesy, and they usually don't tell me anything about you. The objective line, though, is really important for you if you're someone, like we had that question in the last session, who's done 3 internships in 3 different functions and now applying for something that's maybe not relevant on paper to what they've done. The objective section is your opportunity in 1 or 2 sentences to really tell us, this is why I'm applying for this job. So kind of connect the dots for us. And I did an internship, research, and then marketing, and now I'm applying for a PR job because. Like, leverage what you've done to tell us where you're going. If you're someone who is, a marketing coordinator, then you became a marketing manager and you're applying for marketing director, I get it. You don't really need to tell me why you're applying. It's a next logical progression in your career. So your objective line isn't as important in that case. So the whole point of this is if you are going to use an objective line, make it count. Don't be generic, because if you're not adding value with it, you can throw it out. Experience. So. In the first section, we kind of did this experience little game, the writing with the left and writing with the right hand. Your experience section is really where you have a chance to, in kind of a bullet format, tell us what your experience and your qualifications are, again, as they relate to the job that you are going to. And where this is important is, a lot of people tend to write these resumes with, they sort of tell me what they're currently doing in their job, right? And they list the bullets in the order of importance that they are in their current position. While they might use those same skills in their next job, they may be at a different level of importance. So don't be afraid to reorder and rearrange and omit or add bullets as they are relevant for the next job. And you get that by the job description. So there might be something on the job description that for them is a basic required qualification, but that little tidbit is something that you did kind of in your free time or that wasn't a huge part of your current role. That's probably the thing you want to put up top on your resume, because that's the first thing that a recruiter, an HR person, or a hiring manager is going to look at when they see the resume. So translate your current experience into the experience that they're seeking. You use some of the same language, the same terminology. Be careful with acronyms, because a lot of acronyms are very industry or company specific, and you might think that we know what it means, but we don't. So don't be afraid to spell it out. Education. Oh, go ahead.
You kind of alluded to it in the last session as far as us looking at positions and kind of choosing either not to apply or to apply. But I'm wondering from the recruiter angle, how much do they pay attention to titles? Like if I had a title, I don't know if I was like a program coordinator or if I was just an educator, but like would that stop you from looking at the rest of my resume? Like maybe because that position was so inclusive, and I'm going to detail it in those bullets, but that's not.
No, I'm not going to not look at your resume, but I mean, you're basically starting the relationship as me questioning why, as opposed to, oh, I get why she's here. So it's really just kind of formatting it to where you start the relationship with the recruiter or the HR person or whoever's reviewing your resume as someone who makes sense in this role, and you have the luxury of being able to play with your resume as much as you want. I mean, again, as long as you're not misrepresenting yourself, you can represent yourself in whatever light you feel fit for the job you want. So, no, titles aren't a huge deal. But don't forget, you have some flexibility with titles too. As long as you're not misrepresenting yourself, so there are things that you can be kind of creative with. Yeah.
What should be the format of your experience? As in, if I mention my duties and responsibilities, my POR, or should I be mentioning my key achievement at the end of the job?
So it depends, right? Because like key achievements are different for anyone, because it could be a key achievement in your life that has absolutely nothing to do with the job that you're seeking. In that case, it's sort of a nice to have in terms of we get a full vision of who you are, but that key achievement may not apply directly to the role that you're seeking. So I would lead off with something that's more relevant. So think of it as like from the top down, the top being the most relevant, the bottom being the least relevant. So it's not a matter of not including something, but it's about including it in the right place. So when I start reading your resume and I'm skimming through, I see most relevant to least relevant in order. So education and skills. Education, if you're applying for internships, tends to be really important at the top. When you're applying for jobs, I'd rather see what work experience you have. Now, some of you may not have work experience yet, so you can lead off with your education. It doesn't really matter if it's like top or bottom, but if you spend a whole paragraph telling me every class you've ever taken, every dean's list you've ever been on and everything, and like half of your resume is really all academic, and I really have no clue what kind of real world experience you have, that's probably not going to be great. So you want to make sure that I can see it. Your skills section is really important in terms of keywords. So in the same way that when you do a Google search, the terms that you're searching will determine what page comes up. Apply that same SEO concept to your resume, right? So I have a database. You're applying into you've got an online application. You're applying into a job. I've got 800 applicants. How am I going to sort through 800 applicants without having to read all of their resume? I'm going to do keyword searches based on what the job requires. So make sure that if there's a keyword in the job description that appears, that it also appears in your resume. That's the easiest way to bridge the gap. And your skill section you can also expand too. And yeah.
When you're trying to, for recent graduates, when you're trying to tie in skills that maybe was from an organization or something like that, and obviously you can't do an entire portfolio of your groups that you were engaged in and everything like that, what's the best way to tie that in instead of just saying like Relay for Life, but in Relay for Life you did marketing and leadership and all the things that encompass in it?
Yeah, so maybe in your case you lead off with a function instead of the company. So you lead off with the title that you had and then you add the company. Instead of like Relay for Life, volunteer, you could just be like marketing coordinator, Relay for Life. So like your reader like automatically sees your function and knows that you're appropriate for the job you're applying to. Yeah.
I'm actually interested in different industries, which I'm trying to figure out, and I definitely found your first part really helpful to think about. But I feel like when I'm writing my resume, I have an experience as an event coordinator, which is something that I'm interested in, and then I also have another experience in as like a receptionist at a real estate company.
Right.
So I find like both are, will an employer like not consider my resume if there's like different companies with the skill sets are very similar?
Right, so no, we'll consider you, right? I mean, there's very few reasons why you really won't consider someone. Well, if you're relevant, we'll almost always consider you to some degree. But if it comes down to your ability to sort of spell out the things that you did in those two different jobs to make them relevant to what I'm recruiting for. So if you have a coordinator job and you have an assistant job, but the two things are doing the same, and in both sections you're giving me the exact same skill set, probably not very effective. What I would probably do in that case is maybe the one that you did first, use that for the most junior skill sets that you developed, and then go to the more senior skill sets in the next position. Even if you did the same thing in both jobs, there might be a volume of things that you did more in the second one rather than the first. In your case, and this might apply to a lot of you, where you haven't decided what industry you want to be in yet, which is totally fine, but in that case you focus on function, not industry. So your goal becomes to become an expert or to get the qualifications or the experience in the function that you want to be in, so that you then have the luxury of choosing what industry you want to apply it to. Just a different way of looking at it. Your digital profile is really, really, really important. The majority of employers will look at it somewhere, somehow. As an HR person, we have certain guidelines of what we can and cannot look at, but your hiring managers and the people who are going to interview you don't. They're not trained in interviewing, they're not trained in laws of labor laws and employment laws. They might Google you, they might find you on LinkedIn. So understand the difference between a professional network and a social network, right? A social network is really going to be your like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, those things. Now, a lot of people do use those outside of Facebook, maybe Twitter and Instagram a little bit more professionally, especially if you're an editorial type person who's doing, working with images and photos, or someone who's working on like news or journalism. That does become an extension of your profile. That becomes an extension of your resume that someone can look at if we're looking to bring you in as an editor. I want to see what you're writing about. I want to see your writing style. I want to see what you're talking about. If all of your blogs are about cooking and you're telling me that you are going to come in and be our next Middle East expert, I don't know, maybe. But that's probably not like the best thing. So your professional networks, it starts with LinkedIn. It doesn't end with LinkedIn though. For some of you, you're going to find that there are other .coms out there that are professional organizations that you have to belong to. So if you're a designer, for example, belonging to something like Cropped or Behance, or having your portfolio online becomes really, really important. So separate it into two buckets, your professional footprint and your social footprint, and make sure that that matches your story. Again, this is all about telling the same story. So your resume, your elevator pitch, your digital footprint, all match the story that you're telling me. So for us at Viacom, for example, like we do see a lot of people that are very, very creative. It doesn't mean that you can't be in a professional job while being a creative person. But where it does work against you is we're interviewing for a marketing analytics position that's really crunching numbers and doing financial planning and forecasting, and you're in the interview saying, I'm really passionate about this, I love it, I can't wait to be in this job. I go on your LinkedIn profile and it says aspiring singer looking to move to LA tomorrow morning. There's a discrepancy, right? And you become a risk. So make sure the story's being told evenly kind of across the board. Also be aware that people can Google you, so be mindful of what comes up in your search results, because if they Google you without knowing, they may interview you about it, and you may not know what you're hit with. So again, it's different for HR than it is for the hiring teams, but know what's out there about your profile. So in telling the story, again, it really needs to get to the point of what you want to get to. And then the fourth step, yeah.
Is there a must to having a digital profile?
There's not a must, but I would say if you don't have a LinkedIn profile at this point, you're probably a little bit behind the times. Part of it is that LinkedIn is going to be your best asset for networking too, especially if you're looking to see what other people have, the type of jobs that you may want, and how to get into that. When you're creating, in step 2, when you're creating your path, one of the ways to create your path is by looking at the paths of people who have the jobs that you currently want, and see how they got there. LinkedIn's a great place to do it. You won't find that information on Facebook or Twitter. And start connecting with them and understanding the networks. It's also great research for what companies are out there, and things like that. So definitely I would say have a LinkedIn profile. The other benefit of your LinkedIn profile is it doesn't need to be like a resume that fits on 1 or 2 pages. Your LinkedIn profile can be as long as you want. So that's kind of your opportunity too to like sort of keep that as your master sort of resume, right? Where you have all of the things you've ever done. But again, it needs to tell the same story as your resume. So in step 1, we kind of dreamt big and thought about what's important to us. And in step 2, we created a plan. In step 3, we created our story. And now in step 4, you take action. This is when you take everything that you've now built and take action and move forward with it. So taking action is really, it boils down to understanding the process. It's a process that is scary for a lot of people because they don't know how it works. So I'll walk you through the basic kind of recruiting process and how to own it. But it's really about identifying your interests, which you have, the ability to interview. So showing interest could mean applying online. It could also be meeting someone for a drink and saying, hey, I'm interested in that world. It doesn't have to be the formal application, but the process starts with either a company or a candidate showing interest. Then if there's mutual interest, you move on to that interview stage. Then you close out with a negotiation and an offer and how you get there. Again, if you don't have your story ready, if you don't have your path ready, it's really difficult to network because you are not giving anybody action items on what they're supposed to do for you or where you're going. So networking is important because you never know who's going to give you an opportunity to get into a position. So it's not always about who you know, but it can a lot of times be about who you know. Who you know can crack the door for you, but they can't give you the job, so you still have to walk through that door on your own. And so network, but then it is about you and your ability to close the deal. So networking's great, informationals are great. So informationals are basically meetings that you have with people to learn about what they do, to learn about their career. When you're approaching people, you don't want to approach as a job seeker, right? Like if you reach out to someone and you say, hey, I'm a recent grad and I need a job, can you please talk to me? It's like you and 20,000 others, especially this time of year. So like April, May, June, graduation time, December, graduation time. They're getting emails. If you found them, odds are somebody else found them too. And unless they have a position and they can see within 30 seconds that you're the right fit, they're probably not going to respond. You're asking almost too much by, it's like, hey, I don't know you, but can you be my career counselor? Right? So if you are going to reach out, it's a lot better to reach out with a specific position in mind and reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm interested in this role, can you help me out? Or, I'm interested in your world, I'm not seeking a job, I'm still in school, or I'm happy in the job that I currently have, but I just want to learn. I've seen your profile, I admire what you've done, I just want you to teach me something. People love flattery, and they will tend to respond. If it's framed in a way where you really want to learn and you're asking for an advocate, if you're not asking them to give you something other than their knowledge, your response rate is going to get much, much higher. Response rate on LinkedIn is well below 10%. So for every 100 emails you send, you may get 5 to 10 back. Don't be discouraged. It would be a good thing if you got 5 to 10 back. So know how to network what you're asking for. Informationals can turn into interviews very quickly. So be ready for that because that person could eventually hire you. The application process is also really important. So a lot of people feel like when they apply online, they're applying into a black hole. No one sees my application, I'm wasting my time, it's tedious, it's a pain in the butt process, and anyways, it's useless. It's not. We see applications. We see almost all of them. But the reality is the majority of you are applying for jobs that aren't appropriate for what your skills are or what you're seeking. That's just the kind of the truth of it. The other part of it is you're applying with a lot of other people. So the fact that you didn't get a call doesn't mean that you weren't qualified. It doesn't mean that you don't have the ability to potentially do well in that job. It just means that there was someone else who just happened to be more appropriate for that job. Not better or worse, just more appropriate for that job. So don't get discouraged because you're gonna have to apply a lot before you get response rates. But it is a sort of a necessary evil. And we use it for a few reasons because it also tells us like your attention to detail. The application is tedious and we don't like it, but because it is tedious and there's multiple steps, it's like, what's your ability to follow direction? What's your ability to not misspell things a third time you're asked the same question on an application? What's your interest level, right? Are you just mailing it in and saying, well, I like Viacom, it's a cool company, I'm just gonna upload my resume and press send? Or did you actually take the time to fill out all of the forms and actually make it a real application where I can tell, hey, this person might actually be interested in this? The other part with the application process is that we see everything you've applied to in terms of if you're applying to multiple jobs within one company. So there are going to be inevitably a bunch of jobs that you qualify for, especially for those entry-level folks around in this room. Because if you're just looking at the job description as like, can I do this job? You can probably say yes to the majority of the ones you're looking at. It doesn't mean that you're appropriately or the right fit for that job. So make sure you're applying to things that are connected, because if you do get an interview, it's going to become very difficult for you to make a case that you're right for that job if you apply to 15 different positions that aren't related at all. And you're trying to, you can't be a perfect candidate for everything, right? But you can be a perfect candidate for one or two things. So keep it somewhat specific, because we will see this. I'm going to zip through because I think we're running low on time, so
You have 5 minutes.
yeah, so we're going to kind of zip through the rest. But the interviews, like the purpose of the interview is to really make sure that what you're telling us on paper or the way you're presenting yourself is what you really are and what we're getting. Now, it's really difficult to gauge. There are some people that are great at interviewing and there's people that are really lousy at interviewing. The fact that you're good or bad at interviewing doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not you're going to be good in the job, right? But it's still a necessary part of the process, again. So for all the interviews, we really are going to be looking at, and I'll give you more specific tips, but think of it in terms of preparation, communication, fit, professionalism, and ambition, meaning how much did you prepare for this? How much did you research the person interviewing you? How much did you research the company? How much did you research the function that you're going to be serving? How well are you communicating? How available are you? So I call you, but you don't make yourself available for 2 weeks. odds are I'm not waiting for you to return the call to make a hire. I'm going to go on to the next qualified person. So your communication needs to be pretty quick and you need to be available. Remember, you're the job seeker, right? So you need to be available, you need to communicate clearly. Are you a good fit for the role in the company? Those are things that we're looking for. Your ability to understand what the role is, what the growth path is. Professionalism, are you, again, playing the right part? And that counts quite a bit. But you can't really do that without knowing the company and the company culture and knowing how to present. But if you're ever confused, err on the side of being more formal than less formal. You can always take down the formalities. It's really tough to go back up once somebody's seen you with that sort of informal eye. And ambition really tells us where you're going. Because it's not just can you execute this job today, but we know that this job leads to a career somewhere. So if we get you into this position, can I start thinking about promoting you next year? Can I start thinking about the next step in your career? Or am I just using you to fill a gap for 1 year and then you're going to get bored and move on and we're going to look for someone else? So think of these things and broken down into sort of smaller parts. I mean, we talk about this stuff, but it's really like preparation, practice. You can practice. If some of you may be very nervous interviewers. Practice, because the reality is we're not interviewing you to try to trick you, right? Like in my dream scenario, I don't want to interview 30 people before I find the right person. I'd rather interview one and that person be great. So we're not trying to trick you. We're really trying to just make sure that what you're telling us is legitimate. So, don't be afraid and have confidence. You don't need to be super cocky, especially if you're a millennial coming in, because that's going to translate into like, is this person going to want to move too quickly, or like, are they going to be hard to manage? But have the confidence to be able to articulate what it is that you want, why you're here. So practice with people if you're someone who's nervous. Be punctual. And you've heard this probably a million times, be on time, be on time, be on time. It's not because people are jerks. It's just that if you only have 30 minutes to meet with someone and you show up 15 minutes late, I'm not moving my whole day to accommodate you. So you'll only have 15 minutes of my time to try to tell me why you're the best fit for this job. Conversely, if you show up like an hour early, it's super awkward. There's not waiting rooms everywhere, and sometimes you have people who are like, oh, they're an hour early, and it's like, oh, all right. Like, go get coffee, go get lunch, like, go back. So, if you're afraid of being late, be around the building, and then sort of do your thing, but, 15 minutes early is usually a good time. Let's see what else. Career path questions. We get questions about that, like what questions should I ask? Allow the interview to guide the questions that you're going to naturally be curious about. I get terrified when I see somebody come into an interview with a notepad and like 15 written questions. It's like, dude, you have no idea what we're going to talk about. Like, how can you have 15 questions already? So allow the conversation to really dictate the things that you're going to want to ask about. Listen first, speak second. So don't be too eager to tell your story, because there's an element of your stories that are more relevant than others. Let your interviewers guide where it's going to go. Always follow up. Thank you notes are critical. You don't need to mail them. They take like months to get to us. Email. You can't email too early. Like, I have people send thank you notes while they're still in the building on their way out. I'd rather have that than somebody wait a week, because there are some people that look at that as a measure of your interest. So offer we're going to cover very, 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 very quickly. We're over time. You don't have to say yes right away. All right, don't be scared to ask questions. Don't get nervous. Don't be scared to negotiate. Don't be scared to ask for things. You are now using this person who's making you an offer to decide whether or not this is a good fit for you. So don't be afraid to ask questions. We always get the question, like, can I ask for more money? Absolutely, just don't be a jerk about it. Like, it's all about how you ask for it, right? So if you kind of come back and say, I appreciate it, I'm so very interested, any chance we can move up on the base, or something we can do on the bonus or something. Understanding the pay structure too, base and bonus. When are the bonuses paid out? How much of the bonus have you historically paid out? Things like that are very important. You don't have to say yes right away, but you do need to see it through. So we have people who say yes to an offer, but then they completely screw up the process before they start, and we've taken back offers because of it. Because you've gotten the offer doesn't mean that you're now our star employee. You still need to manage the way you're going to close out until you're here in the first day. So your communication becomes very important. And that's kind of it for step 4. So we're going to skip step 5 today, which is fine. Step 5 is really how to do well in your first job and setting up your next move. But for now, we'll keep it to step 4. And I think we're way over time.